Well, this is wonderful. I can't believe how many people are here this early in the morning coming to see me on the last day of the conference. So thank you. I appreciate you having me here today to speak. I wish I could have been here earlier. I had another event yesterday, but I heard a lot of great feedback on the day, and so it sounds like the conference is going great. Well, you can rest assured that you're not going to have to think too hard for this session. So you chose this session in the morning that you're not going to see much data. Most of this is just going to be some storytelling because previously I had hoped our design team was going to be here demoing our cover crop decision support tools and getting your input on it, and they canceled. So now you get me instead, and I'm going to give kind of an overview of the work that's going on with cover crops more broadly. So the purpose of today's talk is to really show, is to put the Mid-Atlantic into context. You know, we kind of are a little bit of a bubble over here. There's a lot of cover cropping going on in this part of the country, and there's a lot of innovation with cover crops going on in this part of the country. And so what I'm trying to do is just give you a little overview of where we're at and how we're kind of trying to tie a lot of folks together. Crops are complex management tools, right? They respond to their environment. They don't really behave very well, right? It's not like putting down a fertilizer or spraying a herbicide where you can get a constant rate across a field and drive real fast and everything's going well for you. These things are messy. You got wet spots in the fields, you got dry spots, you got low and high fertility. That all drives the performance of the cover crop, which then drives the kinds of benefits we get. And if we're really relying on our cover crops for a number of services, like maybe potentially weed suppression, then these spots here really are going to impact our overall performance. So how do we kind of get the knowledge we need to understand how all this site specificity matters, right? Is we need to kind of put together all of the complexity around climate and soil and management. So we can't just be looking at our individual locations and seeing how things respond there. If we really want to understand how cover crops fit, where they're going to work, where they're not going to work, and what do we need to do to tweak that to be more spatial in our management, we need that knowledge base, right? Because we want to put cover crops into a more precision framework, and to do that, it's very knowledge intensive. This is just to illustrate the point. You can see, and this is 2012, but you can see just like the kind of adoption we have in our region for cover crops compared to a lot of parts of the country, right? So we are in a little bit of a hot spot, and there's a lot of innovation and great things happening here, but where it works here is not going to drive why it might work here or here or here. So we need all of that information kind of put together so we can kind of make sense of the noise and give better recommendations to our growers. The cover crop councils have been a big part of that. So if you're not aware of the cover crop councils, now you are. I'm glad you joined the team. All of you are potential members to the Northeast Cover Crop Council, right? We have an annual conference every year where we do a lot of extension and outreach, and we also are developing a lot of content and material to help growers. I'm going to present some of that today. But here's the breakout. You can see the Midwest has been around for a bit longer. The Northeast established about 4 years ago, and the Southern and the Western is just kind of coming online right now. So please get involved with the Northeast Cover Crop Council. We're a really fun bunch. We've got a logo. So right there, we really got it together. Here's our mission statement right here. I'll give you a chance to just glean that. But, it's to serve our producers and ag professionals on giving the kinds of recommendations they need to growers to maximize what we can get out of cover crops. We have a website, so come visit us. It's still a little bit under construction. We're really modernizing it and adding a lot more content in the near future, but it's certainly a source of information, and it's where a lot of our tools will be housed, as well as NRCS is going to be housing a lot of these decision tools as well, because we're co-building with NRCS a lot of the decision support tools around cover crops. And swag is coming, so be prepared. Hats, shirts, magnets, stickers, that's all coming your way in the near future. So get your swag. We even have it in black and white if you don't like color. So part of addressing that spatial complexity in the landscape and getting cover crops to work across the landscape and understanding how it's going to be optimized, precision ag is a big part of that, right? Is that, dealing with the spatial complexity in the landscape, and managing accordingly, right? And a big part of what precision ag has meant to us more recently is, varying our applications of our fertilizers or herbicides, or, dialing in on specific crop populations throughout the field. There's more and more advancements coming in the precision ag space, but this is certainly a big part of the solution that we need to get cover crops working. But we need to kind of just embed holistically these sustainable ag strategies into a precision framework, right? Again, cover crops are not like a herbicide. We can't just apply it across the field and it's going to do exactly what we want, where and when we want it to do it. It's super messy. It doesn't behave. And so putting that into a precision framework, or some of these other strategies into a precision framework, requires lots of information, lots of knowledge. And so part of the remainder of this talk is just how are we going about getting that information. So a big part of it is coordinating research across distributed networks to capture how climate and soil and management are interacting. So if we can understand how that interaction space is working, we can provide more site-specific recommendations and ideally build cover crops into a precision framework so that when we are planting our cash crops, we have a map of the cover crop performance in that field that we've gotten from satellite or drone data, right? And that we can then vary our crop populations or vary our herbicide applications across the field based on how that cover crop is performing, because that cover crop is part of our system and we need to manage accordingly. So how are we doing that? So I'm going to give a bunch of examples of some of the ways that we're doing that. We've got this in the major grain producing regions of the U.S. right now, like in corn and soybean country. We've got coordinated projects working around integrated weed management to look at herbicide resistance management. We have a number of tactics that we're trying to bring together in an integrated weed management approach, and a big part of this is cover crops. So we've got all throughout these regions folks looking at the ways we manage cover crops, how that interacts with weeds and different weed species, different soils, different climates, and the whole suite of different management factors. And so I want to illustrate the point here that we're in our region, we're really hyper-focused around soil conservation, right? Chesapeake Bay has been a big instrumental force in conservation. We're some of the highest adoption of no-till acreage in the U.S., and it's important to be aware that there's a tight linkage between where our no-till acreage are and where we have high levels of herbicide resistance. And so we are at risk of losing some of our most important conservation strategies. We're seeing more and more throughout where we have big infestations of weed resistance, more and more tillage. We're seeing more and more tillage across the landscape to deal with resistance. And so that's certainly taking a big step back for us in a lot of ways relating to conservation. So part of what we're looking at is ways to kind of integrate management strategies to deal with resistance. Cover crops are certainly play an important role in that. So we have this national trial looking at different cover crop kill dates of cereal rye in combination with different herbicide programs across the U.S., as I mentioned. And so, stay tuned. We got 4 years of this, so we'll have about 45 site years of data across the whole U.S. around how cover crops and herbicides are interacting to suppress weeds in no-till soybean production. We're also integrating other strategies. This is a piece of equipment that we have called the Harvest Time Weed Seed Control practice, and this is the Harrington Seed Destructor. And so the Harrington Seed Destructor was developed in Australia. It's just a big cage mill. This is already the old model. So this is the toe behind, and this is the combine basically separates out the fines from the chaff that just the chaff with the fines and the weed seeds in it from most of the trash. The trash comes out the back. The fines go through this cage mill here. It pulverizes the weed seeds at combine when it's harvesting it, and then spits it out the back of that piece of equipment. And this was designed to crush rock in the mining industry in Australia, so it's pretty good at crushing pigweed seed. It's only effective if the weed seeds are on the weed plant at the time of harvest. Right? If the weed seeds have shattered and gone to the ground, this is meaningless. It turns out that some of our most problematic species retain most of their weed seeds at time of harvest, like pigweed, right? And so we're doing a lot of studies on the seed reign of weeds and looking at the combinations of this, but we think this is an important strategy. The new technology is just integrated into the combine, so this is kind of now an integrated model. We are still having a lot of trouble with this piece of equipment. This machine was designed to work in the peak of the summer heat and very dry conditions in Australia. So it works really great when you have incredibly dry material and the weeds are all done and you're out there in a wheat field in the middle of Australia. In the fall, in the wet soybean conditions that we have, it has been more problematic. And we've got some people in the room here who've experienced some of those problems of pushing that material through the combine. So it's still a work in progress, but the main point here is that almost all of that seed is destroyed that goes through this machine, and that what is not destroyed, which is a very small fraction, we then buried that material or left it on the soil surface and tracked its decline over time. And essentially anything that is deposited on the surface at harvest, most of it is not viable once you get through the winter, right? Because we know that about seeds, that when we damage the seed coats even slightly, they become vulnerable to pathogens and fungal attack and things. So a really effective way of terminating weed seeds. Here's a long-term study that we have at Beltsville, where we have no cover crops, small and big cover crops. So just the blue represents small. And I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to change the units here. So this is like about 1,000 pounds per acre right here. This blue line here, these are all about 1,000 pounds. And some of these are getting into the 3,000 or 4,000 pounds per acre for the late kill. So killing it when it's at the tillering stage, I guess I will take this off. Killing it when it's at the tillering stage, which is here, right? So just early in the spring, versus letting it get more into boot or close anthesis. Still doesn't affect when we plant our soybeans, but creating gradients of cover crop biomass out there. And what I wanted to illustrate the point, by the way, this is like almost the only data in my presentation, so take it in. So we have 3 years of 3 years here. This is the no cover crop, the early kill and the late. So just think no cover, small, big cover crop, right? And then we have in combinations with Harrington seed destruction, right? And we're only showing the corn phase here because this thing doesn't really work well in corn. It works well in soybeans. Most of the weed seeds don't get into the combine when you're harvesting corn, but it does in soybeans. So the effect of the seed destruction is not going to be present in corn. It's going to be present in the following year after soybeans. So I know that's confusing, but so you harvest after soybeans, the next year is corn. So this is the corn. This is the This is the corn phase. Don't look at this year because we had lots of problems with the equipment. It wasn't working for us. So this year doesn't make any sense. But you look at this first year, we did this, you can see a pretty big reduction in the overall weed seed banks and the pressure of the weeds in this system. And we also see a really cool interaction, which is that not only are we reducing it from with HSD than without the HSD, but then with the interaction with the cover crop, you can see we get really good suppression overall. And we saw some of these same dynamics in 2019, just not as pronounced because we didn't have as much weeds that year. All right, done with our data. This team called GROW, some of you may have seen Mark Van Gessel's presentation. I don't know, did anybody see Mark's talk about GROW, right? So we got this national team of weed scientists who work together. We've got a website, so come visit us. This is the new mock-up. I think it's going to be live shortly. The old mock-up is still going. But, the old website is still there, but this will be the new face of it. So lots of content, lots of videos, lots of testimonies around what's working and what's not, and from folks all across the country working with herbicide resistance management. So come check us out. We also have a long-term cropping systems experiments at 3 locations. This one I just showed you some data from is in Arkansas, it's in Illinois, and it's in Beltsville, Maryland. And it's allowing us to look at these interactions between how we manage our cover crops, how we manage our herbicide programs, and with the harvest time weed seed control, how all that is interacting to drive herbicide resistance management. And this is our lovely site in Beltsville, Maryland. You can see here we've got a couple of these long-term experiments. So another way we're trying to get data around cover crops and how they're driving performance and informing our decision-making from that climate soil management interaction space I keep talking about is long-term studies more comprehensively across the whole U.S. So in addition to ones I just showed you, there's actually about 19 or 20 of these across the U.S. that are being coordinated by USDA ARS. And so this allows us to get the longitudinal relationship. So just over time, how does a given management practice drive soil, agronomics, and our pests, for example. And a lot of these studies, particularly the grain-producing sites have cover crops embedded within them as part of some of the questions they're asking. So that's just one of the ways we're getting data. We're also trying to develop regionally adapted material. So there's a national cover crop breeding network that's all coordinating around developing new germplasm for growers, but they're not just developing new germplasm that will be a one-size-fits-all model, developing regionally adapted lines. So we have breeding sites. These research stations are the red, so you can see all the red research stations that are doing a lot of the improvements. There's some on-farm participatory breeding, and then there's some places where we're doing seed increases, and then these advanced line trials. So the triangles represent where we're testing all of this germplasm out before we start to release cultivars. And here, if you just wanted to know some of the partners, I just put that up there. I know it's hard to see it in this room. But anyway, so it's a distributed network to kind of develop regionally adapted lines. We are already, for a number of our species, already beating the checks. The checks would be what's commercially available. So we expect to have new cultivars of cover crops coming online soon. These are the kinds of material we're working with. So focus on crimson clover, hairy vetch, and peas from the legumes standpoint. And we're doing some with small grains and brassicas. In the case of the legumes, we have different targets. Not everything is the same target, right? Depending on where we are in the country. So in our southern sites like Maryland and North Carolina, we have a lot of disease issues with peas. So we're focusing a lot on disease resistance. With hairy vetch, you know, how many people in the room hate hairy vetch? Right? A lot of you, right? Or don't even want to touch it. And so, you know, we're trying to address that issue by removing the hard seed coats in hairy vetch. So making it so that it's not going to produce a persistent seed bank and potentially be a weed problem down the road for you. So we have a lot of work in that area. We're also doing a lot of molecular techniques with the vetch to kind of see if we can remove that hard seed as well. And then crimson clover, soft and hard seed, because some farmers want to produce naturalized seed banks and others don't. But with all of these, we're selecting for much higher winter hardiness. So we're trying to move legumes up further north, and high biomass and fast growth rates. And here's an exciting little effort that we have going on, where the infancy stage of this, we have some cereal rye germplasm that has high evidence of varying degrees of allelopathic potential. And so we're doing kind of a whole screening and kind of selection process for trying to increase the allelopathic potential of cereal rye. We've got this going on at Maryland and at NC State. We're in the very early stages, but we're already starting to see a signal of big differences between the germplasm out there and some potential to select for that. Here's just some visuals. I thought you might want to see what a cover crop breeding nursery looks like. Here's our crimson clover. Plots down at NC State. This is, some of you may know Chris Reber-Corton in the photo. And then after we're doing some of the selections, we do these kind of half-sip studies where we're looking at kinds of the improved lines and how they're performing. And so this is a picture at Beltsville where we're testing. This includes germplasm from all our different sites then in a single study where we can look at how they're performing. So the other way that we're trying to get at developing all the data to really inform how climate and soil and management intersect. I kind of keep saying that climate, soil, and management intersection piece because that's really what we need to build, you know, adaptive decision support tools for growers. So we felt like an on-farm network is really the critical next step. You know, we could do some of these long-term studies or we could do some collaborations across research stations, but really that is not going to capture the spatial complexity that's in the landscape, and we need to really be embedding these studies on farm. And so this kind of birthed from an NRCS SIG grant in 2016, actually. And so we had a couple of years where we were just doing some regional studies in the Mid-Atlantic, so like North Carolina, Maryland, and Georgia. And then we just kept scaling up. We got a number of grants that enabled us to do that. And so, and most recently, our national grant that put us at about 140 farms across the major grain producing regions. So corn, soybean, and cotton growers are the growers we're working with. But we have big ambitions. We have a lot of different irons in the fire in the private sector as well as the public sector. We're really trying to build, a lot of this is coming off of building private-public partnerships. And the goal is to really scale up and to have a very highly distributed network. And we're also developing relationships with folks out west. So this will kind of help us really understand the drivers of cover crops across the U.S. So let's break this apart. What does this on-farm now look like? So we have research stations. A lot of these are universities or ARS stations that are key hub locations that are helping to facilitate both the on-station common experiments, but also to support all of the on-farm networks. So you can see they're distributed across the US, and then they are helping to support all of the different activities that go on-farm. So these are just some of the key goals here, right? Is we want to capture how climate and soil management intersect to drive performance. We want to integrate across a lot of different metrics. So we're monitoring insects, disease, slugs, water, nitrogen, weeds, so a lot of different factors that are driving the performance of our corn and our soybeans and our cotton. And we're doing this across big strips in farm fields with and without cover crops. And we don't control anything the farmer does. So farmers in the room, if you want to collaborate with us, we're always looking for more farmers. We don't manage anything the farmers do. It's all their inputs, all their genetics, all of their management. The only thing we ask is that, one, that they have a history of working with cover crops. So we're not looking for folks who are at the learning curve. We're looking at folks who have an established relationship with cover crops. And then so the only treatment is really no cover crop, because if we're working with cover croppers, the treatment on their farm is, can you just either not plant or just spray out a big strip, like the size of their spray boom, or we'll come out and do it if they want to spray out a strip for the no cover crop. And then a big part of what's working here is providing the real-time data flow to the farmer. So as the data is coming online, we're developing the infrastructure and the pipeline of that data to then aggregate it and provide visualizations to growers, and I'm going to show you some of those slides, and really building the infrastructure to support the testing of new technologies. So our mantra is light and tight. If you've got a light and tight protocol that can be implemented in a very short period of time, and we can do in a couple farms in a day or two, that fits our system. So we're not really taking deep dives on a lot of metrics. We are doing really light and tight protocols that will give us a lot of information, but are not going to be a big commitment for any one individual. So this is what some of that looks like, right? We're like coming out there and taking cover crop biomass. We're putting it into these mesh bags so we can track the decomposition and nutrient release over time from these cover crops. We have continuous monitoring of water in these systems that are depth structured, so these sensors are at different depths in the profile, so we can monitor the infiltration rate of water, so how much water is getting into the soil, and we can develop total water budgets over the growing season. And this is really important, especially with climate change, where we have more extreme rain events. We want to know, when we get those 4 or 5 inch rain events, are we getting better infiltration with the cover crops than without cover crops? So that's kind of a key piece of this. We're also on some sites doing some of the more environmental measures like deep soil nitrogen and tracking that. Not everybody's set up to do that. And all of this infrastructure, again, is light and tight. So when we come in after a farmer, we come in, the farmer calls us or we call them and find out when they're going to plant. We get the biomass and make these mesh bags. We put it on the side of the field, out of the field, so it's not in the field. And they go in and they plant. Right after they plant, we install this. We know where their tire tracks are, so we're out of their way, right? These mesh bags are out of their way. These sensors are out of their way. They can come in and do all their post-management, side dress or herbicide applications. And as soon as they're done with their last management, the solar panel goes up on a tower, gets up high, and that way we can keep powering all these instruments throughout the growing season. We're also really now this is a new light and tight protocol. We have some collaborators who have a lot of experience with drones, so we are using drones. But we developed these low-cost imaging solutions for monitoring weeds. So we're trying to catch a lot of the spatial complexity of weeds out there, because weeds are, as you know, messy. They don't behave. They germinate in some places. They don't germinate in others. So we have to be able to capture that. And so more broad imaging allows us to do that. This is just some visuals of what some of our farms look like. Big strip of no cover crop. No cover crop. Just wanted to give a shout out to what we're doing on the weeds side, led by Mutu Bhagavathinyan in Texas A&M. But we're doing this at a lot of sites, including the Beltsville sites in Delaware and NC State, so as far as proximity to you guys. But developing kind of the image libraries for being able to differentiate a weed from a crop, and then to be able to distinguish between weed species. This is being used both from a research perspective, just to understand if we got large landscapes of with and without cover crop, How much is that cover crop benefiting us from a weed management standpoint? Putting out a couple of small sample plots is not going to get us there. We need to capture large landscape data, and this kind of allows us to do that. But we're also building the digital libraries to help with automation of weed control. So we've got collaborations with folks who have autonomous robots and variable rate applicators and trying to inform that process as well. So that's a big part of the project. Just a visual of, kind of where our plots might be laid out. So this is a with cover crop. This is a without cover crop. And there's these microplots here because the microplots are where we focus on the most intensive sampling, right? Where we take our cover crop biomass, where our water sensors go, where we monitor bulk density of the soil and things like that. So we have these microplots in these fields. This is just a schematic to help visualize kind of the nodes and where the sensors are in these fields. And these are some of the outputs our growers are getting. So we're still kind of developing the user interface. We are not design specialists. So it's quite remarkable already what some of our staff has put together. But we certainly have work to do. So we've brought on more programmers to help with the interface and so that it's more digestible. Because the growers are the ones consuming this. We need to make sure that this is consumable, right? It's designed in a way that is most usable for them. But just some examples of the kinds of outputs we can generate in real time. As soon as the data goes in, the farmer knows where their cover crop biomass fits in across the trajectory of other farms in their state. So BGR, this farmer, this is how their biomass compared to Maryland or Pennsylvania, for example. How much biomass they got. We got information about the, this is now providing some details around the nitrogen and fertilizer needs. So this is kind of providing some inputs on their nitrogen management, but very soon this is going to be feeding into an adaptive nitrogen management calculator. So we have one that's working live in Georgia, has been for years. We're just regionalizing this adaptive calculator to work across the US, and we'll be able to feed in the performance of your cover crop and give you an output of the quality, the quantity, and the nitrogen and nutrient release of that cover. This is just another visual when you look at multiple states of the biomass. And we also have input about the water availability. So we want our farmers to be able to go out into the field and say, have that co-learning experience with us. While we're learning how much cover crops may or may not benefit their water availability, they go out in the field and they say, oh, is my field having water stress or not? It looks like that corn is doing better in the cover crop plots. Am I just kind of seeing that, or is that real? Oh, let me look down at my app. Yeah, look, there's more water in the cover crop plots. So they kind of have that kind of real-time experience with the benefits, and we hope that also helps facilitate greater adoption. I know that this is still not the palatable visuals that we want to provide farmers. We are updating kind of the outputs so that it's a little bit more digestible and more action-oriented. Part of what makes this team work so well is we're developing apps for our teammates, so folks who across the country. We're trying to, again, keep it light and tight and very easy to do what we do so that we can start to move this agenda out to being more of a citizen science approach. We ideally want to be handing our tools and as a research toolkit to farmers, in the form of county agents and ag professionals, both private and public, so that they're already having these relationships with the farmers. You're already going out and spending a lot of time on the farms. If we can give you super light and tight protocols, these can integrate into the farming landscape, and we can go from this really expensive process of paying technicians to go out there and collect a lot of data to really low-cost solutions that will get us more and more information about what's going on farm and help feed that information right to the farmers. So part of what we're doing up front is working out a lot of the sensing solutions that you're using with like satellites and drones and equipment-mounted sensors. But soon that will be, those algorithms will be finalized and we can integrate this into tools for everybody to be able to integrate. But so we have kind of web-based apps that help, folks acquire data, right, about the farmer management history, their inputs, when we're collecting a biomass sample, just the row spacings of the cover crops, how much, the biomass they got. This kind of feeds into it. So we're just kind of automating a lot of this process for the team. All right, so to transition now away from getting data, a lot of this was just how do we get the data and how do we build enough data to actually inform practice? Now, how do we make this data available and palatable? So, a big problem with our data right now is that it's siloed away, right? We have university and ARS, scientists working across the country collecting data, and it all hangs out into their own little hard drives, and they have a 2-3 year project of a master's student or a PhD, and they did 3 treatments, and A and B went up 1 year, and A and B went down the next year, and they published a paper, and it says, well, it's inconclusive because A did this 1 year and B did that in the next year. And we have the whole landscape of publications is littered with those kinds of papers, right? Because we're not able to put our data into a broader context of climate and soil and other management. So part of what we're trying to do is build an infrastructure that supports that. Bring together folks who are in the cover crop space and the breeding space and the research space to build these national databases that can build out the kinds of data we need so we can connect studies. So if there's 10 studies going on in the state of Maryland and Delaware and Virginia, those studies are communicating with each other, and that we can learn a lot more from those data sets than the challenging interpretation we have from a 3-year study. That data sets are building new decision support tools or calibrating and improving our existing tools. Those tools are being used by our farmers. As you saw, we're monitoring what's going on farm. And so the goal here is to just create these positive feedback loops, right? We collect that data from the farm, that goes into our databases, that informs our tools, the farmers are using these tools, and so on, hopefully creating a more and more, precise, sustainable, and productive systems. So our team is branded ourselves as the Precision Sustainable Ag Team. So come check us out. We just got our website up and going, but more to come. And so here's just, where we're trying to go with these tools, right? Researchers need to ask the what-if question. Certainly, if we can improve cover crop performance by 10% in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, how much reduction in nitrogen loading is that going to translate into, and how much improvement in bay life, right? Those are the what-if questions farmers can ask when we pull all these kinds of data sets together. But then, obviously, all of the technology transfer that we want to go straight to the farmer, mainly through the typical tech transfer mechanism, which is for all the folks in this room, right? You are here and delivering these solutions directly to farmers. Some of our farmers are going straight to the source. But we also want these tools to be used by policymakers, right? When NRCS is making decisions about cost share, or when RMA is making decisions about crop insurance, we want them to have the data that we've integrated across the U.S. to help inform those decision-making so that they can best value your time and the farmer's time. The other concern we have, how am I doing for time, by the way? Oh my gosh, perfect. We're also really concerned about this fragmented landscape of tools. I'm sure most of you are well aware of this, right? There's just a million tools out there. Everybody's building tools. There's a million interfaces out there. There's just so many products, and that's, that provides a lot of fatigue for the consumer, right? I mean, if you can, many of you are here in Ocean City, I'm sure if you come down here in the summertime and you go to, there's those stores that sell 150 different hot sauces, right? And you see those 150 hot sauces, and you're like, oh, I want to get a hot sauce. And then you get over there and you start looking, and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to buy hot sauce. Because you can't make sense of all that noise. Where if they just had 6 hot sauces varieties up there, you probably would have bought 2 of them, right? And so that's what I think is happening for a lot of folks is that fatigue. And so we're trying to at least coordinate more as much as possible as we can and integrate a lot of our tools into a single platform so that everything is communicating. The term that folks use is interoperable. So that means when we make one tool, that tool is communicating to another tool, and you can get single outputs from those tools. And the other issue is that, folks like me, we're scientists. We just like to look at our data. We have a certain way we like to think about our data. The way we think about our data and look at our data is probably, by and large, not the way folks want to consume information. And so we're terrible at delivering that kind of information. And we need folks who are not terrible at that. So we're working with a lot of folks who are, on the human-centered design, phase of this, who are, working with social scientists and designers and folks who understand how people consume and make decisions so that our tools reflect that. And so that more to come on that. I told myself I wouldn't present this, but my past postdoc, who's now at Purdue, developed this slide to illustrate this point, right? We've got all this this data out there. We've got models. We've got tools. It's just this hard ecosystem to make sense of. And so trying to put all of this together is what we're trying to do. And so right now, we have a big effort around this cover crop space. It's interacting with a bunch of other products too, but we have species selection tools. We have seeding rate calculators that are providing input about management. We have a weed management tool that's coming online, and there's an economic calculator. A lot of these tools are a hybrid of products developed by different folks. For example, 2 of these tools are just built by NRCS that don't have the interoperability or the interfaces needed to communicate with these other tools. So that's part of what we're doing. Or some of these tools are really well made, but they're working great in Georgia, or they're working great in the Northeast, and then we need to regionalize these tools. And so that is a big part of the process, is taking information and regionalizing it. So right now we're heavily focused on the species selection, the seeding rate calculator, and the economic calculator, and getting those working. And we already had a live demo of this at the Northeast Cover Crop Council conference a week or 2 ago, 3 weeks, I can't remember anymore. This should be live and out for beta testing and getting input from folks in the near future. We would really appreciate having you present to help inform the tools. So what leads to an effective cover crop decision support tool, right? We've got to have high quality regional cover crop performance data, and we need to have this improved user experience, right? If you have to spend a lot of time figuring out our tool, we've lost you, right? I mean, you just like downloading an app. If you can't figure out an app in a couple minutes, you've moved on to the next app, right? So this is how we're regionalizing this. So for example, for our species selection and seeding rate calculators, we have developed information for given states, and now we need to regionalize this. So we've broken up the Northeast by hardiness zones, from Maine all the way down to us down here. And we have different leads on these hardiness zones, helping to facilitate the regionalization of this data sets of these tools. And so you can see some of the different folks that are involved, and you probably know a lot of these folks. I don't know what that slide is. Oh, and here's like some of the categories that you can be looking at that are informing decision practice, right? So environmental tolerances, the agronomic needs, the soils, how it grows and behaves, your cash crop planting information, all of these factors are going into recommendations about how you're going to use cover crops. So this is not what it's going to be the final visuals, but I'm just giving you some input about what kinds of things go into this. So here's just a live demo to give you an example. You could select your objectives, prevent erosion. It's giving you information about your cover crops, how much residue you might still have, your planting windows. So this is our first mock-up of our species selection tool. Give you a sense of how this is working. There's lots of ways to also just peer in and learn just about cover crops and what they do, not with specific objectives of your own. All right, so this was what we first, it just cycles. Here's an example of the adaptive nitrogen management calculator that was made out of University of Georgia that we're regionalizing. So we've been spending the last 4 years collecting extensive details about the decomposition of cover crops, how that affects nitrogen availability, and then calibrating and validating this model so that it can be a national tool integrated with the space. So that when a farmer gets online and they're trying to make decisions about cover crops, they can put in some basic objectives, their geographic location, and it gives them inputs about species selection based on those objectives. That immediately pings a seeding rate calculator that gives them input about that, which immediately pings an economic calculator that gives them input about the economics. And then when they go out and take a small subsample of their cover crop, they can shoot it over to us, and we'll give them a quality of that cover crop and a quantity, and that can feed into their adaptive nitrogen management. Just more visuals from that tool. So that's my presentation. This is just to highlight a lot of the folks that are involved. And there's also a lot of efforts, particularly in the technology space, in integrating a lot of public-private partnerships. And you can see we've already started with some of those folks with Microsoft and Esri and EarthSense, a robotics company, and others. So this is both university, USDA, and private sector folks.